Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone who claims to love you. Your mouth is moving, your throat is tightening, your hands are fidgeting, but you're not sure why you're still talking. You're explaining yourself again, clarifying, justifying, rationalizing the way you feel, the things you need, the boundaries you set, and the pain you didn't deserve. They're looking at you, but not seeing you, hearing you, but not listening. You watch as your words fall into the void between their perception and your reality, and you wonder, when did love become a courtroom, and when did you become the defendant? You feel the ache in your chest, the dizzying frustration of trying to translate your soul into a language they refuse to learn. You think, maybe if I just explain it differently this time, maybe if I stay calm, maybe if I give examples, maybe if I show how much I've tried. But underneath the surface of this performance is a quieter truth. One you dare not name, because naming it would break the fragile illusion that keeps this relationship, this friendship, this job, this family bond barely intact. The truth is this: you're not trying to be understood. You're trying to be validated. And there's a difference, because if they truly wanted to understand, they would have asked. They would have leaned in. They would have met your vulnerability with curiosity, not defensiveness. Compassion, not convenience. But they didn't, and they won't. So why are you still explaining? Why do you keep offering your heart like a thesis paper, waiting for someone to approve it? Why are you still editing your identity so someone else can feel comfortable inside your presence? Why are you addicted to proving your worth to people who don't even value truth, only their version of it? And here's the paradox that gnaws at the edge of your spirit. The more you explain, the less they respect you. The more you try to convince them, the more they silently decide that you're wrong. The more effort you give to make them see you, the more invisible you become. What if your eloquence isn't saving the relationship? What if it's prolonging its death? This isn't about giving up. This isn't about being cold or cruel or shutting down. This is about the deep inner knowing that energy doesn't lie, and your soul knows when it's being dismissed. It's about choosing dignity over desperation, choosing silence over screams into emotional black holes. It's about recognizing that some people don't want understanding, they want dominance. They don't want dialogue, they want obedience. They don't want truth, they want to win. And you've been trying to love someone who treats empathy like a weakness. You've been trying to build bridges where the other person keeps lighting matches. You've been offering explanations to someone who has already made up their mind. So what are you really trying to accomplish? Maybe the real question isn't, how do I make them understand me? Maybe the real question is, why do I feel the need to keep explaining myself to someone who has proven they aren't listening? What part of you still believes that your worth is on trial? Who taught you that silence is failure, and that walking away means you lost? When did leaving become the same as giving up instead of setting yourself free? Somewhere deep inside, you already know the answer. You know that every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't value you, you abandon yourself a little more. You know that your truth doesn't need defense. It needs space. And you know that love should never require a PowerPoint presentation. Still, you stay. Still, you explain. Still, you hope that maybe this time will be different. That maybe, just maybe, they'll finally get it. But what if getting it isn't the point? What if the point is this? You don't owe anyone an explanation for your evolution. You don't owe anyone a detailed essay about why you decided to heal. You don't owe anyone a dissertation on why you're finally choosing peace over patterns. Maybe it's not about them understanding. Maybe it's about you remembering. Remembering that the most powerful act of self-respect isn't to convince, it's to walk. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Stop explaining. Start walking away. Because some exits aren't escapes. They're homecomings. Why is it so hard to walk away? Why do we linger in conversations that drain us, relationships that confuse us, and arguments that feel like emotional quicksand, pulling us deeper the more we struggle to be heard? The answer isn't surface level. It isn't just about people-pleasing or fear of conflict. The roots dig far deeper into the unconscious realms of our psyche, the frameworks of our culture, and the architecture of our early emotional experiences. Let's peel this back. From childhood, We are taught that our survival, emotional, social, even physical, depends on one thing: acceptance. Not truth, not authenticity, but conformity. We learn that being good means being agreeable, likable, non-disruptive. We internalize the belief that our worth is tethered to how well we can make others comfortable, even at the cost of silencing ourselves. And when you grow up in a world where love feels conditional, where being seen is tied to being useful, quiet, or palatable, you start performing. You learn to explain yourself, not as an act of connection, but as a means of self-preservation. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most of us are unaware that our need to explain ourselves is driven by an unconscious compulsion to correct an old wound. A wound that whispers, "If they finally understand you, maybe you'll be enough." But understanding isn't validation. It's not salvation. And the wound doesn't heal by proving your innocence to those committed to misunderstanding you. It heals by recognizing that some battles are designed to exhaust you, not enlighten you. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that most human conflict stems not from objective reality, but from clashing perceptions and insatiable desires for control. When you try to explain your truth to someone whose identity depends on not hearing it, you're not speaking to a person, you're confronting their defenses, their ego, their need to be right. And in doing so, you enter a game that has only one rule: you must lose for them to feel safe. That's not dialogue. That's emotional hostage-taking. Think about it. How many times have you sat across from someone who asked you to talk it out, only to realize halfway through that they weren't listening? They were loading ammunition. They weren't reflecting, they were defending. You weren't resolving anything. You were just circling the drain of an unresolved power dynamic. Nietzsche once said, "Sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed." When you explain yourself to someone unwilling to evolve, you're threatening their illusion of who you are, who they are, and the fragile narrative they've built around your relationship. They will resist, not because you're wrong, but because your truth dismantles their comfort. This is where the philosophical becomes deeply personal. You've been trained to believe that walking away is weakness, that silence is an admission of guilt, that not explaining yourself makes you cold, dismissive, or the problem. But who taught you that? And why do they benefit from you believing it? Society teaches us that women must justify their anger to be rational, that men must explain their emotions to be valid, that trauma survivors must prove their pain, that anyone who says no must offer a thorough explanation to avoid being seen as selfish, ungrateful, or cruel. This is not empathy. This is control cloaked in politeness. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Hell is other people," but he wasn't condemning connection. He was pointing to the fact that when our identity is viewed solely through the eyes of others, we become trapped. We begin performing the self they expect instead of embodying the self we are. And this is the hidden problem. You don't just want to be understood. You want to be free. But freedom requires detachment, not from people, but from the belief that their understanding is necessary for your worth to exist. It isn't. Imagine walking through a foggy forest, surrounded by voices calling your name. Each voice demands an explanation. Why did you say that? Why did you change? Why are you pulling away? Why aren't you fighting harder? You try to respond, but the forest echoes your voice back to you, twisted and hollow. No matter what you say, it's distorted, misinterpreted, dismissed, and suddenly you realize this isn't a forest, it's a maze. And the more you speak, the deeper you go. The exit isn't louder arguments. It's not clearer explanations. It's silence. It's turning your back on the illusion that being heard is the same as being healed. Because here's the deeper truth. You don't walk away when they finally understand. You walk away when you finally do. When you understand that your peace is not a negotiation, that your value isn't up for debate, that your presence is not a favor to be repaid. It's a gift to be honored. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and existential psychologist, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You cannot force someone to understand your heart if their ears are tuned only to their ego. You cannot keep explaining your boundaries to someone who profits from crossing them. And you cannot find freedom by asking for permission from the very hands that keep you bound. The hidden problem is not that you need to be heard. It's that you believe being heard is the only path to peace. But what if peace is found not in their understanding, but in your release? Now imagine this. You're in a room full of mirrors, but none of them reflect you accurately. One makes you look smaller, another distorts your face, one adds weight, another subtracts it. Each mirror holds a version of you shaped by someone else's expectations, judgments, fears. And for most of your life, you've been walking from one mirror to the next, asking, "Is this how I'm supposed to look?" That's the unseen consequence of living to explain yourself. You become a collage of reflections that were never truly yours. Every time you over-explain why you didn't answer a call, why you walked away from a toxic friend, why you said no to a family event, or why you chose your peace over their comfort, you hand over a piece of your identity to be edited, judged, and sometimes weaponized. You think you're being clear, rational, mature. But often, what you're really doing is negotiating your right to exist as you are. Here's where the mind turns against itself. The brain is wired for connection, but also for survival. In early human tribes, exile meant death. To be misunderstood could mean being outcast, banished, alone. That evolutionary programming still lives inside us. So when someone misreads your actions, your brain sounds the alarm. Fix this. Explain it. Be safe. It's why you feel a physical pull to clarify yourself even when you know the other person won't truly listen. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort of holding two opposing beliefs at once. When you try to live authentically but still seek validation from people who benefit from your silence, dissonance turns inward. It mutates into self-doubt. Suddenly, you're not sure if you're right to walk away. Maybe you are being too cold, too harsh, too sensitive. That's the trap. It's not just that explaining yourself doesn't work. It backfires. The more you do it, the more power you hand over. Your sense of self becomes fragile, dependent on feedback from those least equipped to give it honestly. Neurologically, every act of over-explaining reinforces a loop. Your brain rewards compliance with a hit of dopamine, a chemical trick that makes you feel like you're building bridges. But you're not. You're burning your own. And on a societal level, the damage runs even deeper. We've built entire cultures on the illusion that mutual understanding equals harmony. But understanding is not always mutual. Often it's hierarchical. The woman in the boardroom who's asked to smile more, explain her tone, soften her ideas. The black man pulled over for a routine check who has to explain why his presence isn't a threat. The survivor of trauma who's forced to relive her story again and again to be believed. These are not conversations. They are interrogations of existence. And when you participate in this system, when you feel compelled to justify your boundaries, to offer your pain on a platter of politeness, you keep that machinery running. You become both prisoner and guard in your own emotional jail. Think of all the minutes, the hours, the days you've lost explaining yourself, justifying your decisions, editing your truth into bite-sized pieces, hoping it's palatable enough for someone else to swallow. Now multiply that by years. What could you have built with that time? Painting, a book, a business, a boundary, a self that does not shrink. And here's the tragedy: the longer you explain, the more you forget. You forget what it felt like to simply choose without defense. To feel something deeply and not need permission to feel it. To leave a room without a farewell speech or a follow-up text. To live a life that doesn't require footnotes. You forget how to move through the world with quiet conviction. That forgetting, that erosion of self-trust, that's the true consequence. And it shows up everywhere. In the fatigue you carry when you're around certain people. In the fear that being misunderstood is worse than being mistreated. In the exhaustion that feels spiritual, not physical, the weariness of constantly translating your soul into a language it was never meant to speak. All of this becomes your baseline, normal, expected, even praised. But beneath it, something ancient stirs. A voice that doesn't raise its volume but sharpens its clarity. A whisper that says, "This is not who you came here to be." Because you didn't come here to be a mirror. You came here to be a flame. And a flame doesn't explain why it burns. It just does. The unseen consequence of over-explaining is not merely burnout, it's betrayal. Of the self, of your time, of the silence you need to hear your own truth rise like smoke above the chaos. And that's where this all points. This pain, this conflict, this deep unrest. It's not about others failing to understand you. It's about you slowly forgetting how to understand yourself. Every time you repackage your truth for someone else's convenience, you chip away at your own clarity. Every time you offer another explanation to someone who's already made up their mind, you dull the edge of your own inner knowing. Eventually, you start asking yourself for explanations. Why do I feel this way? Am I overreacting? Should I just stay quiet? You become your own skeptic. But there's a way out. A way to end the internal cross-examinations. A way to step out of the courtroom where you've been both defendant and witness, testifying over and over about your right to peace. The exit is not in crafting better arguments. It's not in being more articulate, more composed, more mature. The exit is in rebellion. And that begins not with a roar, but with your back turned toward the noise. It starts with silence. Not the passive kind, the silence that seethes beneath swallowed words and forced smiles. No, this silence is active, defiant. It's the silence of a soul no longer negotiating for space. Imagine standing in a room where everyone is talking over you, demanding, accusing, pleading, explaining. Your instinct is to raise your voice, to clarify, to fix, but instead you stand, still, silent, unmoved. First they don't notice, then they get louder, confused, angry. Why aren't you saying anything? Don't you care? Say something. You don't. You leave. And in that moment, something ancient reawakens in you. Sovereignty. You see, rebellion doesn't always look like shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes, it's the unceremonious removal of your presence. A calm refusal to explain your value to those who benefit from your doubt. This is the walk-away moment, the pivot point where everything changes. But to reach it, you must first dismantle the architecture of false obligation brick by brick. Let's start here. You owe no one an explanation for your healing. If you needed rest and you took it, that is enough. If you sensed a lie and stepped away, that is enough. If you chose peace over performance, that is enough. But they deserve closure, you tell yourself. But what they often want isn't closure, it's control. And the more deeply you try to explain, the more subtly they reestablish that control under the guise of understanding. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "To be alone is the fate of all great souls." He wasn't romanticizing isolation. He was naming the price of true independence. Walking away without a press release, without a post, without a final paragraph. This is the act of reclaiming your narrative from those who believe they authored it. Carl Jung talked about individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are by shedding the masks you've worn to survive. But individuation isn't neat. It's not polite. It requires a kind of spiritual violence, a breaking apart of the self you built for others. And breaking free is violent in its quiet way. You will feel guilt. You will feel grief. You will feel a terrifying aloneness that whispers, maybe you made a mistake, but you didn't. You made space. Space for new language. Space for boundaries that don't need signage. Space for relationships rooted not in performance, but presence. Consider this. What if your silence is not absence, but instruction? What if walking away teaches more than any carefully constructed speech ever could? The greatest act of rebellion in a world addicted to explanation is to leave without one. And here's something radical. The right people will not need you to explain your worth. They will recognize it in the way you breathe, the way you protect your peace, the way you say no without an essay. To those people, your silence is sacred. Your boundaries are respected. Your energy is not something they feel entitled to manage or modify. But how do you get there? First, you must interrupt the pattern. When you feel the urge to explain, pause. Ask, what am I afraid will happen if I don't explain myself right now? That's your trailhead. Often, the answer is rejection, or judgment, or abandonment. But here's the deeper truth. If someone leaves you because you stopped over-explaining, they were never staying for your truth, they were staying for your performance. And you were auditioning for a part in someone else's script. Tear it up. Rewrite your own. Second, practice detachment from outcome. Not detachment from care or humanity, but from the compulsion to control perception. Jean-Paul Sartre warned that hell is other people, not because of their presence, but because of the gaze, the constant surveillance of the self through others' eyes. Rebellion means refusing to live under that gaze. It means asking, not do they get me, but am I being real? There is peace in being misunderstood when you've made peace with yourself. Third, normalize your silence. Make it your new language. Silence when someone gossips. Silence when someone demands your pain as entertainment. Silence when someone cloaks control in concern. Not out of pettiness, not as punishment, but as precision. Your energy is not a public resource. And explanation is not your native tongue. It's a dialect you learned to survive. Now unlearn it. Finally, embody the walkaway. Let it live in your posture, your decisions, your day-to-day. You don't need to post about it. You don't need to make it dramatic. You don't need them to get it. Because something powerful happens when you walk away without drama, without rage, without a manifesto. You become untouchable. Not because you are invulnerable, but because your value is no longer up for debate. You've left the courtroom. The judge has no power if the defendant no longer shows up. This isn't about ghosting. It's not about running from difficult conversations. It's about discerning when a conversation is no longer a dialogue, but a trap, a loop, a drain. This is about reclaiming your time, your inner stillness, your right to live without narrating your every step. You were not born to be understood by everyone. You were born to be whole even when misunderstood. And maybe that's the most rebellious act of all. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you've been chasing ghosts. Not people, not relationships, not validation, but projections, illusions stitched together by your deepest fear. That if you didn't explain yourself, you wouldn't exist in the minds of others at all. Now imagine choosing not to chase anymore. Not because you're bitter, not because you no longer care, but because you've discovered something holy in your stillness. And here's the final truth, the one we rarely say out loud. You were never meant to be understood completely. Not by them, not even by yourself. You are not a formula waiting to be solved. You are a becoming, a river in motion, and rivers do not explain where they flow. All your life, you've been taught that peace comes from being heard, validated, clarified. But what if that's the great lie? What if peace is not about being understood by others, but by something far deeper, something ancient and unspoken? You keep trying to explain your heart to people who are fluent only in logic. You bleed poetry and they want bullet points. You offer depth and they skim the surface. You ask for presence and they offer performance. And every time you explain, you translate yourself. You simplify the complex. You clip your wings to fit inside their frame of reference. But you were never meant to live explained. You were meant to live expressed. You were meant to stand as a full sentence, not a footnote. This is the final liberation. You can leave without closing the loop. You can end a chapter mid-sentence. You can walk away from a conversation unfinished, and it can still be complete. Because the soul does not require punctuation to heal. The philosophers warned us. Nietzsche told us, no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. But owning yourself doesn't mean conquering others. It means letting go of their need to approve your existence. In the vast architecture of the cosmos, do stars explain why they shine? Do mountains justify their silence? Does the ocean write disclaimers before it crashes on the shore? No, they just exist, and their presence is their truth. So too must you become, without justification, without narration, without apology. You will lose people. Let them go. You will be misread. Let them guess. You will be called cold, arrogant, detached. Let them speak. You no longer owe anyone the burden of carrying your inner world. You are not a manual. You are a mystery, and in that mystery there is power. Consider this. What if walking away is not a retreat but a return to yourself? What if the path to inner peace isn't marked by what you explain to others, but by what you refuse to? We spend years, sometimes lifetimes, trying to be seen, understood, validated. But the deeper truth is this: you do not exist to be decoded. You exist to be lived, felt, known by the few, misunderstood by the many, and whole regardless. The greatest spiritual act is not forgiveness. It's release. Release of the need to justify your no. Release of the need to clarify your goodbye. Release of the belief that love equals explanation. It doesn't. Love is not explanation. Love is presence. And you can love someone deeply and still walk away quietly. Not out of cruelty, not out of pride, but because the ground beneath your feet whispered a deeper truth. You're done explaining. You're done shrinking. You're done rehearsing your own pain so others feel comfortable. And now you walk, not to punish, not to prove, but because the chapter is over and your silence is the period. And when you walk away like that, not flinching, not lingering, not unraveling, you become dangerous. Not in a destructive way, but in a sacred way. You become the one who doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't argue. You become the one who chooses peace over persuasion. You become the one whose energy speaks louder than words. You become the one who understands. Not everything must be explained. Not every connection must be preserved. Not every loss is a tragedy. Sometimes losing the need to explain yourself is the beginning of finding your true self. So let them misunderstand you. Let the stories swirl. Let the narratives run wild. Because the only person who must understand your journey is you. And if, on this journey, you find yourself more quiet, more still, more selective, know this. It's not because you've become cold. It's because you've become clear. And in clarity, you no longer perform. You no longer convince. You simply exist. Powerfully, silently, free.